Introducing today's original character being redrawn, and it is Sinbad by Ven. Now, this is Sir Sinbad, one of the many original characters that Ven and their cousin have made and worked on. She is a knight, she's a beast tamer and summoner. Most importantly, she's a time traveler, which is quite a cool concept. And she's reincarnated for about 100 times now. She's very strategic and cunning, as well as very loyal towards the Round Table and the platoon she leads. She also has 2 pet birds, but they haven't been designed yet, so we're just going to work with the design for Sinbad herself. So first up, I started with the head, as I normally do with my character designs. I found a pose and a reference I liked, and working on the head of the character is a good way of figuring out which way it's going to show. So this was a 3/4 view. I then shrunk things down and moved them around a bit so I can start putting part of the body pose in, and I really think this pose kind of portrays rather well. It gives a chance to show off the armor, which you'll see a bit later on, and it works quite nicely with the whole kind of like feminine aspect of the character. Next up, I started roughing in the eyes, just because once they're in position you kind of get an idea for the rest of the face. Put the ear to one side and started work on the hair. Now, I struggle with hair. I don't know about you all, but I definitely do struggle with hair on characters, which means that it was a bit tricky to discern the hair on a new layer from the lineup. So I found a cool tip in Clip Studio, and you could do this in another art program by creating a new layer above the layer you're working on, clipping mask it, and then just filling it in with a color. But there's actually a subtool which turns the entire artwork on that layer, or all the lines you're drawing on that layer, into the color that you selected. In this case, blue. But it helped me differentiate the hair, and then I used it on each layer afterwards because I found it really useful to separate bits of the armor out from the rest of the design, so I could see clearly the structure of the pose, but I could also see the actual design of the armor as I'm drawing it and see what's working and what's not working. I also like the fact that this design has some kind of, I don't know if it's straps, if it's jewelry, if it's chains around the kind of like the top of the legs, the hip area. It quite added to a really nice aesthetic on Ben's design, and I wanted to carry that through. Okay, so we're now getting onto the layout stage, and I started off with the eyes. I wanted to make them pop a bit, so as you'll see, I added a bit of a colour over the top of the eyelashes just to give them a bit of a gradient and a bit of a softer feel. The key thing about the layout stage is it is perfect to add extra details. So as you'll see, I'm going along and I am working on the hair, but I'm adjusting bits. I'm maybe moving a little bit of the hair to one side, I may be adding a few more details. When it comes to stuff like the armor and that, it works really nicely. A good tip, if you can, and some people don't want to work this way, do bits on a new layer. So if you know you've got an intricate section, add the details in and go over the lines properly to make the shape, and then do a new layer, do the next bit of details over the top, and you can erase the lines on whichever layer you need to without impacting the others. It's a very useful tip, and it's very helpful. I did like the fact that she had these 3 little kind of like hair tie braided bits in the braids, and I quite liked the very subtle use of the purple petal design throughout her costume. Of course, this is a kind of more of a upper view of the character, zoomed in a bit, which means that we're only seeing parts of the armor and parts of the outfit and the character. Wanted to kind of portray the main essence of the upper half, like a upper body shot. Here we've got the armor, which is complex, and as you can see even from the rough sketches, I'm trying to figure out which way around they go, and I think at some point I do change one the other way around during the inking stage. But all in all, I quite like this character's design. I do like the wavy hair. I had a bit of fun making it come behind the character, so it kind of gives that, I don't know, it's that feel or aesthetic where the whole flow of the piece comes along, a bit of the composition. This hand is not my best hand in the world. I will apologize for that. I did my best to kind of put the claw bits over the kind of like fingers in the right position for this, and hopefully I've done it justice. So now we're colouring and flats, and this is a really useful stage. I decided that this time round, normally I start with the skin or the eyes. I'd start with the armor and the outfit because it was quite intricate. There's quite a few bits of colors to do and to add together. Then I moved on to the hair, finally adding the eyes and then the skin tone at the end, which I'm very grateful to Clip Studio. Someone's got a whole load of different skin tones, which is really useful to have as a palette. So I then started working on the skin tone. I then started working on the skin tones of the character. A really good tip for this is to, once you've filled in a solid color for a shadow, get the eraser and put it on a soft airbrush, knock the percentage right down, and just erase a little bit of these shadows. You can see it makes it a bit softer at parts, and it really does help. Then once I've got the skin tone kind of like built up and a bit of blush and the face done, kind of the basics bar any major highlights, I moved on to other elements, which is the armor itself. I wanted to kind of get the light going. I know this was kind of like a gold design, or the armor's kind of going to be metallic to some degree. So I wanted to try and focus on the shadows of the light coming in. But a tip for this material, it does reflect light in other sections. So sometimes the darker bits or the shadows or the highlights will be on the opposite side to where you think they'll be, which helps give that effect. I'm also trying to simplify the rendering stage on the character. I found that sometimes too much detail does take away from the essence of what you're trying to do. So you'll see, for example, even though we've got the shadows and they're in quite intricate areas, they do work quite nicely with the fact that it gives the feel of the impression. This part I'm adding highlights. The good tip is add them full color and then just lower the opacity of the layer. Really does help them stand out. A nice purple kind of glove, which had a really cool glowing aesthetic. And then we're on to the main fabric of this outfit that's going to be more in the shadows. So I gave a rough light shadow as a gradient for working on the key elements in terms of a visual representation before moving on to the more harsher shadows. And again, I'm just repeating the steps: fill a color in, erase it lightly. Then I believe I did the eyes next. Kind of wanted to make them pop, so I started working through them. Do this on separate layers. I'm going to do a tutorial for this, but I'm really proud of how these came out. I know I kind of like filled them in, erased them out a bit, and I've been using this technique a few times. I think my favorite go-to on the eyes is blue and the pink, but once they're done, they really seem to stand out and pop on the piece. I mean, they look really stunning. It's a focal point, which looks really nicely. For the hair, I added a bit more of a lighter highlight into it just to give a bit of a gradient element, and then I started working on the shadows. And it's often a good idea on shadows to block everything out and then light erase it, so you can tweak how opaque you want them to be for how strong the shadow is. Highlights I did on an overlay layer, and then that gives a little bit more of the color coming through. Drop the opacity near the end, and that looks really nice as far as I could tell. The next bit I did was a good tip. You put everything on an add glow layer above your image and you just highlight where the light hits. I did the usual technique of doing the hard light and then the Gaussian blur to make a dreamy effect. Had a texture in Clip Studio which was really nice that I downloaded for the background, and added a little bit of glow to it. But I hope you all like how Sinbad turned out in my style.